Well, I guess jumping 20 years back. We've been in the future, we've been in the past. Let's go back to your early days of hunting, of trying to figure out how to get on mature bucks. It's June right now. What for someone that has not killed a mature buck, or maybe they've only killed like 2 mature bucks, and they're like, "I want this year to be the best year ever." And this is generalized, so let's assume you don't know if they're hunting public, you don't know if they have a lease, you don't know if they're hunting behind grandma's house, you don't know if they have 500 acres. What are some key things that people need to be considering and doing right now to hopefully get on a mature buck?
So I think it's only going to be like always. I don't think this will ever change. It's always going to be a small piece of the pie that does get on mature bucks because it's a lot of work. And I still think today, if you're willing to do the work, you you can get on mature bucks. And everybody wants to get so complex, and it is complex, but I think they over complexify what it takes to get on a mature buck. And I got on mature bucks when I was young, and I was a dummy, a dum dum, horrible hunter, and I end up being a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. But I was shooting mature bucks when I was a dum dum, and I did something that it's like it sounds very very basic, but you said, do I hunt on, hunt on whether they hunt on their grandma's farm, whether they hunt on 500 acres, whether they hunt on public. I just did all of it. I did everything I possibly could. So I didn't hunt on one farm. I hunted on like 20 farms, and they were all usually pretty horrible because it was all by permission or public. And my recipe for mature bucks was, I mean, it sounds horrible, but I would just throw a ton at the wall and hopefully a few things stuck, and they did.
Uh-huh.
Instead of having 5 tree stands, I had like 50. And I was a broke kid. I mean, no money, but I would save up for tree stands or maybe move tree stands around or something. But um, I just, in basic terms, I just made sure I had enough for gas money so I could get to these different farms. And I just spent tons and tons and tons and tons of time on getting multiple places to hunt and just opening up the options. It wasn't that hard. And then the one part I was probably good at was I could pinpoint where to pick my tree stands, and I understood deer movement extremely well, and I grasped that fairly early on in hunting. And I just spent so much time scouting and being in the woods and timber and understanding runs. And it's not complex, just it's just spending a lot of time doing it. And for those willing to travel around to get multiple places to go, even if it's public, hey, this, because here's what'll happen. You go get in Iowa, I don't care where it is. You go to, say you're in Iowa, and you get I'm going to go hunt this public land piece. Guess what? If you pick 5 of them, 3 of them are going to be a disaster by the time hunting season comes because you're going to be all set, scouted. I know where to go. And all of a sudden you're like, there's 5 guys in there right now that found my spot, and it's ruined.
Uh-huh.
And I had to have countless farms, spots, situations just ruined where I'm like, writing that one off, writing that one off. I spent days on this. I spent a whole weekend setting this farm up, and it's gone.
Mhm.
I didn't utilize it one time because it got destroyed. So I just had so many backup plans. Now, there's my point though. How many people are willing to do that? It kind of stinks in some regards, being like, dude, that's a lot of work. But when I was younger, and I will admit this, I'm not like this nowadays. When I was younger, I loved that. Like, I'd go out and hang out with my friends on a Friday night or whatever. And and my buddies would have some plans like going to some sporting event or something the next, whatever. And I'd be like, no, I'm going to the woods in the middle of the summer. And I loved it. And I'd be like setting up tree stands in the summer. And then in the winter, right when um deer season ended, everybody's like, hey, I'm taking a break from deer hunting. I'm gonna go ice fishing, and I'm gonna go to all these sporting events, and I'm gonna go party or whatever. I would go out to the woods and just walk around and scout, but I loved it.
Mhm.
So, part of it, I say it's really, really hard work, but you know it. If you have that fire in you, if you have that passion, you'll do the work. And only piece of the pie, small piece of the pie is like that. And I was
Yes.
just wired like that.
Mhm.
Now, that's not that's not a talent thing or whatever. Because if you say, well, what other things were you kind of into? Kind of, this sport or that sport. You're like, yeah, you weren't real great at that. Yeah, I didn't have a fire for it. There was a lot of things where I'm like, I didn't have a fire for it, and where I say a small portion of the pie is successful. I've been in a lot of other things where I was not that portion of the pie. I was the guy who was like, minimal effort. Fishing, I don't I don't have these lakes figured out, know all the shelves and know when to go here and when to go there, like some of my buddies who are hardcore fishermen. But they deserve to. They kill it when they go fishing. If you put me in that situation, say, "Do you like fishing?" I do. Do I like it that well? Then I'm going to go spend that much time on that lake. I'm not going to do the work. I'm not. It's the same way with hunting. I'm just willing to do the work.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to do the work, don't expect to shoot giant deer or, have the best quality experience or get the opportunities. And even when I did do the work, I still failed a ton. I mean, I had oh man, you got a big deer this year. Yeah. Do you realize that there was 40 other hunts that were disasters, or I
Mhm.
didn't see a deer, or total flops, or I screwed stuff up? Yeah, I mean, I failed a ton. So for every success I had, I probably failed 20 times, and you got to be willing to do that now.
So I guess, jumping in a time machine too, pre-onyx, right? Of like finding, were you looking at printed out maps, or did you have a compass around your neck? And it's a different time of hunting now too. So for someone listening to this that wants to find, 20 different spots, everyone's looking at the same map on the phone with all the different contours, highlights, and looking for obvious deer sign. But I wanted to ask what
It's no
what
different.
so
It's no
because
different. So back then we had the equivalent of Onyx, and I went back to my drawer to see if I had it. And we'd have all these binders
uh-huh.
with just page, and I couldn't find my original one. I know I still have it, but we'd have all of the aerials printed out. And then we'd have all the plat books, and we were
Yep.
just overlaying all the lines with the aerials, and we had every detail on these maps. And I wish I could find that original binder, because that's what we used till 10 years ago. And we did the exact same thing. It just took longer.
Hmm.
And we had to make it on our own with paper, printing paper, which is still, how to have aerial photography, which has advanced a lot. Yeah, we did the same thing back then. It's just like saying, how do I look up a phone number now? Well, I just put it in Google.
Yeah.
Well, how'd you look it up back then? You had a phone book.
Yeah.
Still got it, or you called 55. I don't remember the number, 1212 or something. This is a long time ago. So there was ways to do the same thing,
Uh-huh.
and we did, but we just did it a different way with the exact same result.
So, because now the argument is that everyone can look at the map a lot easier, and therefore, like the obvious spot on public or the obvious spot that's on shared permission, where we can all, like you and I, could look at the same exact map and pick out three of the same spots. So then multiply that by 50 people that are going to that piece of public. Do you think that is an accurate perception of that? So you have to find the diamond in the rough per se, like the obvious in person, but not obvious on the map spot, because the obvious on the map spot is gonna have used to have a camera there, but probably not now if you're in Iowa.
So I would say people do that now. I agree with you. Um, 25 years ago, they did the same thing. Everybody went to the obvious spots. This is
Mhm.
nothing new. So yeah, maybe does it speed it up a little bit? Maybe there's a little more pressure at some of the obvious spots, yes. But 25 years ago, um, even longer, since I remember, people hunted the easy spots, the obvious spots, the funnels. And in Michigan, um, when I was 15 to 20, when I was really figuring out how things worked and I was getting on mature bucks in Michigan, I hunted the easy spots at first. When I started, I'm like, I figured out pretty quick I was not doing well hunting those obvious spots because everybody else was, and they pounded it and they ruined them. So the name of the game 25, 30 years ago was to find the spots where the people weren't, and find the little diamond in the rough that was overlooked, and hiking further back, and sometimes even hiking further back didn't work. because people even back then still did that. You just were constantly trying to find spots that people missed, good spots that people missed. And I avoided the obvious good spots because I knew they would be ruined. Not because they weren't good, not because they weren't effective. It's just 10 other guys saw what's so obvious that they ruined it. Um, and I didn't want to do that. So it was just a game of grinding and grinding and digging to find the spots that are overlooked that are good, and
Mhm.
then getting getting lucky and putting in. So back then, I mean, yeah, it was finding spots that that people didn't pound, and then when I got to Iowa a long time ago, I guess 25 years ago, I brought that same mindset with me that I had in Michigan of find all those deep secluded spots that were overlooked. And then I went, when I got here, it took me over 5 years probably to retrain my brain that I didn't need to do that.
Mhm.
And I was walking past all these great spots that actually weren't completely destroyed and annihilated by people, that I could hunt some of the easier spots. And I totally had to redo how I hunted. Um, and now I'm probably less invasive and I hunt totally different than I did when I was younger. And part of that's the farms, part of that's pressure, and part of that, uh, I own land, so I can do things that a lot of people can't. But um, manipulating habitat and making things, desirable here and there, and having deer act natural, just having natural moving deer. That's not how I grew up hunting. You didn't hunt naturally moving deer, and I do now. So retraining my brain was a big thing. But I'd say even in Iowa now, if you want to hunt public, I'd say you still can find a few pieces that are kind of under pressured, and then your average public land is going to be probably hit pretty hard. Uh, and I would, it's not to say you don't hunt there, but it's definitely a harder game in Iowa overall for everybody. It's harder
Yes.
for everybody, even the guys at the top, even with the best land. It's just harder in Iowa. And you gotta deal with it. You gotta change. You gotta realize that nothing stays constant, and there's
Mhm.
monkey wrenches that get thrown into the system all the time. Hey, I was set this year. I put in all this work, and all my deer just died of EHD. Stuff like that. There's always monkey wrenches.
Yeah. So is there any, because one theme there is that basically it is perseverance of just like a bunch of spots, bunch of options, work hard until you find the mousetrap that you feel pretty confident in, and it's just a numbers game. Is there any other key things that you learned over the years to you think would be helpful for someone that's beginning or maybe has hunted for 5 years and hasn't had the level of success that they want? And do you think that's behavioral? Do you think that's knowledge, lack of knowledge? Do you think that's lack of effort? Combination of all the three?
I'd say try a handful of new things that you would never try before. I mean, I remember I had buddies growing up that they're like and they were, in a way, you think of this as a blessing, but in a way it worked in their disfavor. They're like, my grandparents have 80 acres that I can hunt. And then they kind of didn't have anywhere else to hunt. And that's all they did was hunt their grandparents' 80 acres. And they'd set up 3 tree stands, or 4, or 2, or 1. And they just hunt the same thing over and over and over. And they do this for years. And some of them are still doing it today. And their results are always the same. Once in a while, they get lucky. So, I would just say, hunt different farms, get access to different places, learn different situations, try and experience all sorts of new areas, and just try several new things every year. Like, hey, I used to hunt on just field edges. Um, I'm going to go try and figure out how deer move through the timber. I'm going to put something deep in the timber. I'm going to put something wherever at funnels, and just try different setups and situations, and realize that, the majority might be failures, but constantly change things, constantly try new things. It's very simple to say that,
Hmm.
but a lot of people don't. They just get comfortable in one situation, and maybe even a few tree stands or a certain farm, and then they just, it's like if I had a half acre pond behind my house, and that's like I was a hardcore fisherman. That's all I ever fish. Yeah, go right there. Yep, that's where I put my bobber and my worm. You're gonna catch a nice big bluegill there. Yeah, but go out to the big lake and try something different.
Hmm.
But if you're content with, I like hunting my same very spots the same way, and I have okay results, that's fine.
Hmm.
So I don't think that one's overly complex. Just that's just a pure effort and trial and error and just growing as a hunter. And I'm still changing things now. And I look at myself 5 years ago and I'm like, you screwed up on this, 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 and this. And 5 years from now, I'll look back and be like, you screwed up on this, 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 and this. I'm always trying new things. Always.
What are some
I'm not even close to having all this figured out.
What are some things that you've changed in the last 5 years?
There's gimmicks that I'm like, I want to try this gimmick. That's
You're
not
still the gimmick
gimmicks.
guy.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Case in point. Um, Case in point, everybody's like, hey, do you do watering holes? I'm like, dude, I'm not saying they don't work. It's just I haven't had time for them. Well, I'm going to add some watering holes. I want to see.
Are you doing it this year? We've talked
Yeah.
about it for 2 years now.
Yeah. Well, I just got too much on my plate.
I know.
And at the same time, you're like, don't be the guy that's complacent. Well, I still I still do pretty well for being complacent. I'm not in a bad situation. So it's a little bit like if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Sure.
But at the same time, I still like growing. I still like figuring new things out. So I'm adding watering holes. A few years ago, my buddy's like, the rub posts and the scrape stuff, it's legit, man. It works. And I'm like, all right, I'll try that. My buddy brought down a bunch of white pine posts, and I figured out how to do that. And I messed with different ways of doing that and making mock scrapes out of grapevines or hemp rope. I tried them all, uh, and I like it. And I mean, it does work.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I'm constantly changing.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the big shift in the last 5 to 10 years, good, bad, or indifferent, on the guys that bow hunt out of blinds, and a lot of guys. And part of me, I'm like, it's all right. I like being in a tree stand, but I could care less whatever people do. I could care less. There's nothing wrong with hunting out of a blind. And part of the movement for that is you get guys who are hardcore like me that have spent years after years in brutal cold and wind and rain, and like, hey, I'm getting old. This hunting out of a blind's kind of nice every once in a while. So I like doing it every once in a while. But you didn't see that 10 years ago. Maybe is
Sure.
when you start to see the first of people really hunting with a bow out of a blind. Now it's kind of taking hold and
It's a
growing, and
staple. It's a staple for
yeah,
a lot of people. Yeah.
yeah. And I did it too, but I more did it like, I've got some spots on my farm where it's like very young growth, brushy stuff. I'm like, I can't get a stand in here. And for the wind direction where they come out of, I used a blind. It was just another tool. Like, ooh, I could set a spot up here because I have a blind, because there's no spot for a tree stand. So
Hmm. What'd you find
always
with
changing.
What'd you find? You mentioned hemp rope, grapevine. What ended up working for your? What's your favorite mock scrape mix up, or does it really make a difference?
Splitting hairs a little
Yeah.
bit. So I have a few that I did permanent, where I have so many spots, because and there's spots I set up that I don't even hunt, where I'm like, that got ruined or whatever. There's not a good deer around, but I still set them up. So I set up so many spots. Some of them I'm like, let's just put up a permanent like cedar pole, and that they might rub, or whatever, a pine. I can't even remember what I have. And then I'll put a overhanging branch there, um, where I'll use like a hedge. I'll take a hedge branch and branch it over, and then I'll drape over like grapevines or maybe hemp rope, and that works really really well for like my permanent spots where I don't want to go change the white pine post. But I would say the white pine post is definitely better. But each year you got to go cut more pines. I mean, that's a lot of work. And if you have a lot of spots that you want them in, and a lot of guys are like, hey, I'm only going to do 2 or 3 spots. I mean, that's easy, but I don't do anything just a little bit. I do everything overboard.
Yeah.
So I'll get like a truckload of white pine posts, and I'll spend 2 days putting up these stupid pine posts. Um, and they work really well, though. They work really well. So pine post, same thing on the
Yep.
top. My buddy welded this. It's something off a farm implement, but it's got or a maybe it's a disc. I don't know, but it's got these spring things with these metal. Um, I made a video on it, so I could show you sometime. But it's
Mhm.
got these metal parts that come off of it, and it kind of holds a branch right here, so a branch can go, and then if a deer messes with it, it flexes. Totally silent, but then I can put a hedge branch across there. I like hedge because it's super strong. Deer are not going to break it. And then I'll zip tie to the end of the hedge. I'll zip tie like oak branches, oaks that hold their leaves later, like shingle oak, whatever. And then I'll even I'll zip tie it on there so they kind of hang down so the deer can get their face in there. And then I'll put grapevines in some of them. I'll put hemp rope a little bit. I just try all sorts of different stuff, and they all work.
Mhm.
I mean, you look at like we'll set up a a white pine post, call it 10 inches in diameter, and we'll put that out. And sometimes I'll put a camera on it, just and I'll put it kind of further back, just so the cameras aren't. I don't know. I'm a little paranoid that the deer don't like them. Uh, but it'll be a matter of 3 or 4 days, and that pine post, you're like, they got destroyed. And they are. They're absolutely decimated. So yeah, it works fantastic. White
Mhm.
pine though. But if I made one little boo boo, and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna grab a different type of a pine, a harder tree that the deer don't like to rub. I bet they wouldn't. Pine's great because it's so soft.
Mhm.
It's so soft, and it's got that aroma. And I mean, those soft trees with that bark type, the deer love to rub them. So just very, very effective. It's just
Mhm.
one more little tool though. And people go, well, I'm gonna do this, and that's gonna be the key to getting a mature buck. No, no such thing. No such thing. It's just throwing lots of little tools out there, lots of little mouse traps, lots of different setups, and hopefully, if you set up 50 of them or 10, just a handful of them are gonna work. A handful, and that's all I want.
Mhm.
If I took a truckload of white pine posts, and you're like, how many is that? And I said, I don't know. I just put up 30 of them. Am I going to shoot a buck off all 30 of those spots? Of course not. Maybe one of them works out. But
Mhm.
you did. So 29 out of 30 was a total waste. It wasn't. Um, but now, if I shoot the first buck that walks up and I had unlimited buck tags, I probably could shoot a buck off every one of those posts. Uh,
Right. So, I just talked to Adam with Land and Legacy, and we just recorded put the first half out, and the second half we talked about water holes a little bit, and he was a skeptic as well, and so I asked him, "Are you digging holes, or are you using a Rubbermaid, 300-gallon, 150-gallon type tank? What is your plans for your future water
well,
tanks?
since I go overboard with everything, uh, I'm
You're
doing
making 50 new ponds."
I'm doing in-ground pools. So about $100,000 a watering hole,
If
and
one of them work.
the chlorine. I got to vacuum them out, the chlorine, and no. So I've got a lot of them where I put some in with an excavator, where I made very deep, steep bank clay type watering holes, and I actually did that on my farm fields as with a tile line. This killed two birds with one stone, and most people are not going to do this, so I'm just going to mention it quick, get on to the next one. But I did this because I had some areas that were washing out, and I'm big on erosion. So I would, instead of doing a terrace with just a tile tube, I just dug it way deep, and then when it gets so deep in there, then it hits the tile tube and it drains out and it stops erosion. So I
Mhm.
killed two birds with one stone. The real answer though is I've got um, several different things I'm going to try, and I'm open to this one because I don't have everything pinned down. But somebody gave me, or they're like, hey, try this one out, and it was like a what do you call it, an earth pond or something? I can't remember.
Yeah.
earth something, and
Yeah, earth
I'm going
ball.
to try one of those. I'm going to try several different things, and then in Kansas, um, especially where it's more arid. I mean, I'd say that's even more impactful there, and I don't have any experience on that, but I'm gonna probably guess right on that one. It'll be more impactful, and we'll definitely have watering holes in Kansas. And we're in a little bit more high rainfall part of the state, but during the summer it does get really dry there, more so than here. But I'd say all my spots, I'm going to try. I probably will not get to adding watering holes to every one of my spots because I have an obscene amount of hunting spots. Um, but I probably want to add like 20 of them, and I'm open to suggestions there. So you tell me what works
Jer
best. This is a new one for me.
Yeah, jury's still out. I've put in some earth ponds. I've put in some of the larger gallon, like I put in a 300-gallon water hole, and then I have not done any dirt work where you just make one naturally. So I can't comment on that one, but they do work. Deer definitely drink out of them.
I would love to find a solution where, and and I'm by far not the expert. I'm the novice on this. Like, haven't even implemented them. So not giving advice, taking advice on this. But I'd like somewhere you could get it where maybe they sat slightly below grade, where they kind of filled themselves.
Yep.
So you maybe had a little bit of runoff that would fill in there. So you didn't have to go back and fill them. And
Yep.
I do have all sorts of farm equipment I could use, like water tanks and different ways I could fill them easily. But if I didn't have to fill them, that'd be great. Now, I realize there's going to be some situations where I probably will have to fill them. And then I've asked questions to my buddies. Okay, what kind of water do I use? Do I use, rural water, which comes out of a water treatment plant, which could have, whatever, chlorine in it? Is that any different? And I mean, I think we're splitting hairs a little bit. Or do I need pond water?
The
I don't
can of
know.
worms.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I've just maybe is challenged. Like the more you learn about doing different projects, the more like depending on you ask 5 different people, you get the same thesis from all 5, right? Like water holes, for example. And then they all have this little twist, and that worked for them. It's like so, and a lot of them are like a lot more extra effort. And then so you have to figure out, well, is it worth that extra effort? For example, like is it gonna be worth to take a pump out pond water, pump it into your 250-gallon tank, and then drag it out there, or just fill it up at the fire station for 50 cents?
Yeah. I probably will try both though.
Yeah.
And then and if my result, because again, I'm just starting this and I'm dumber than anybody listening to this, that's done it. I haven't done it. So if I tried both and I'm like, whoa, the rural water, it's gone a week now and they're hardly drinking it. There's something about it. And I'm not saying that's the case. It probably would be just fine. Um, and the one with pond water, they're pounding it. I'll go through the extra effort. Absolutely. Um, my suspicion is it's hypothesis, which I will play out to figure out the result. But my hypothesis is I bet you it won't make much difference.
Mhm.
Bet you it won't. Uh, and then I have other little ideas with the water too, like, hey, wonder if you could get like and I don't quite know. I was talking to a couple people. I think they said a couple companies make this. I'm like, why couldn't you get um, water soluble like minerals and or nutrients or something to put in the water, so they get some extra things that's good for them. And then, I don't know the legality on that. I don't know.
Mhm.
I mean, it just popped into my head. And I do think people make stuff like that. And that's not, you know, clearly I have no clue what I'm talking about other than I know a couple companies make it and I haven't got into the details of who, what kind of nutrients are in there, but it definitely pops into my head. And I don't know Illinois law, but I know you can't feed in Illinois. Can you do
Mhm.
watering holes?
You can do watering holes, yeah.
Okay.
And I asked for this
So
clarification too. Can you put a de-icer in your water hole during the winter? And you can. I haven't done it yet,
you
but you could.
can.
Yeah, you can.
That'd be huge.
Yeah.
Open water for deer, even if so. For me, my brain definitely works a little different than other people. But if somebody said, "Hey, man, deer are struggling for water during this period," if you had open water, that'd be beneficial to the deer, not for hunting. And I understand most people are like, "Well, I want to do something so
To kill a
I
deer.
can get a crack at a deer." That's why they do. I get it. Um, but I would do it just for the benefit of deer. I
Mhm.
mean, if I had all the money in the world, um, I'd have all my ponds with with aeration, so there was open water or watering holes, whatever. Absolutely. If there's a benefit to the resource from that, I absolutely would do it. Now, in Illinois, with how they handcuff you with, you can't ever put out mineral.
Hmm.
Um, and you can't do certain things. And I love that you can't bait during hunting season in Illinois. I love that part. But the supplemental part of it, the nutritional part, mineral and stuff like that, I would, maybe you know the answer to this question, but could you put water soluble minerals in your water tank, in your water source, water hole?
Hmm.
Is that
I don't know.
legal?
I don't know.
I'd be doing it if it was.
Yeah. Do you think supplemental feeding makes an impact in We gotta ask.
Huge. Now,
Because there's
I'll
the
pre-
argument that it doesn't. There's
oh,
people that think that it doesn't.
okay. I will preface it like this. Usually the argument is, usually rightfully so, you're just treating these deer like cattle. Um, whatever. People don't like the idea of feeding. And I'm not arguing against them. I'm not saying they're wrong. And if you don't like that, don't do it. Okay. So I don't want to get into there. Are you pro supplemental feeding or against it? As far as you're just treating them like cattle, these are wild animals. That part of it, I understand. People have different tastes, different goals, and different feelings on that. Taking that part out of it, does it work? Oh, absolutely, it works.
You think
I
it
mean,
can add massive inches to a deer?
oh yeah, oh yeah. I know a ton of people who feed, a ton, right, wrong, or indifferent. Um, I know a ton of people who raise cattle, right, wrong, or indifferent. Um, you know, captive cattle that they live in a fairly confined area and they pump them full of different good stuff, minerals, supplemental feed, high protein stuff. They do that for a reason. I mean, it adds massive pounds to cattle. What it does to deer for inches, um, for growing the racks, for their skeletal system, for general nutrition, on and on and on, is vast. I mean, it's huge. Yeah, absolutely makes a difference. Giant. That's not a gimmick.
Mhm,
Feeding is not a gimmick.
mhm,
If your goal, I don't care if I treat them like cattle and I have the money to do it. It's very expensive. So there's downsides to it. I'm not going to say there's not downsides. It's expensive. It's a lot of work. Um, some people might not like it. I'm not going to go into the CWD debate on that. I actually think they do more benefit than harm. So my big angle, here's where I'll interject opinion on feed. Opinion based on fact. The supplemental feed is unnatural. I agree with that. And I understand why people would want to do it. It definitely, in my mind, in my opinion, based on strong evidence, based on strong results I've seen all over the place with multiple different people, it has a strong impact on EHD resistance, on the occurrence of EHD. And someone would say, and this is where I'm interjecting my opinion, but somebody would say, feeding deer is unnatural. And I say, I agree. Do you know EHD and blue tongue are extremely unnatural? These are not North American viruses. Okay, these came from other continents, shipped over from different types of animals, mainly cattle. And I know we've talked about this before, but
mhm.
these viruses and these serotypes of EHD, the different strains we're getting in blue tongue, two different things, but there's three different types of EHD and there's two different types of blue tongue. Off the top of my head, I might be off by a little bit, that have hit the white-tailed deer in the Midwest. That's new. That's not natural. These deer are dealing with these new viruses, which they're like, we have no resistance to them, and that's why they drop over like flies. Well, when you can give supplements that interact with EHD and interact in these viruses in vastly different ways, everything from repelling the midge to increasing blood flow to things that mimic. There's natural ways to mimic uh, an EHD vaccine through essential oils. Listen to Lee's podcast. He talked about this. I think it was a Hunter podcast where he talked about it in the last half of it on how the natural elements of analogics mimic the vaccines. And if you can mimic some of the vaccines that help deal with EHD in a natural way, and you look at the deer that eat all these, whatever. If you put out garlic's extremely effective at EHD, against EHD. And you say, is there evidence in deer? Is there studies in deer? No, there's not, because we don't really do that. But there's evidence in goats, sheep, horses, all, whatever. I don't know about horses, but I'm making this up. Cattle, uh, and you look at what they've done to fend off viruses and different diseases, even bacterial issues. It's huge. And then you go, okay, what have you seen? Okay, I've seen people who feed where there's a massive EHD outbreak, massive. And the people who are feeding the right things at the right time are losing very, very, very few deer, very few. And then you go 3 miles down the road, 2 miles down the road, where the deer were not able to get any of that, and they got wiped out. I've seen that hundreds of times,
Hmm.
hundreds of times. There's no doubt in my mind it helps with the HD. And if you said, forget the antler development, forget the health, forget the all the other benefits, because I mean, there's all sorts of macros and micros and different proteins and stuff that have benefits. I mean, there's like 20 different benefits to supplemental feeding, minerals, even proper nutrition at a basic level. And you said take all that out, you could impact your EHD. You can impact your farm being the farm that gets ravaged, or the farm that basically got off scot free. Sorry, me personally, this is my personal choice. I would rather take the approach of, I want to throw some things in their favor that are going to help them better mitigate the virus and better deal with the virus, because I spend too much time on this. I spend too much money on this. And I'm I go overboard and all this stuff to be like, yep, all my work, not for 1 year, not for two, for multiple years, just got thrown in the window because all the deer died from an unnatural virus
Sure.
that was important here. I'm not going to let it happen. Now, there's other ways to mitigate that as well. And I mean, people do things with their water sources. That there's other things that if you're against feeding, you could still say, hey, it's still responsible of me. And there really isn't a downside to having cleaner water, to having less mud holes, to not having cattle trample the landscape. And a lot of that one you can't fix because your neighbors do it. But I've got neighbors by me where I ask them, I'm like, hey, are you running ivermectin through your cattle? And they're like, yes. I'm going to see less EHD because they're running ivermectin through their cattle. And
Mm.
I gladly can explain that one. But any midge that comes out and bites them, which the cattle are generally going to be the vector of where the EHD, um, those cattle are living with that virus, and the midge comes out, bites the cattle, and just keeps going, and it's a fire through the system. Well, when they have ivermectin, that midge bites that cow, that midge is dead. It stops transmission rapidly. Ivermectin's massive. If your neighbors are feeding cattle ivermectin when midges are out, um, they're doing great benefit to the resource. And ivermectin's a very, very safe, whatever, the Nobel Prize for uh, medicinal discoveries back when it came out. Very, very safe. And it's very effective
Mm.
at stopping the transmission of biting insects, including ticks. And ivermectin was even studied in several states where they said, in deer, where they said, hey, we have a big problem. People are getting Lyme's disease. Again, a new disease. People are getting Lyme's disease, and it's killing people and debilitating them and ruining their lives. What can we do? And they studied giving ivermectin to reduce the tick population. Very effective, extremely effective. And I'm not getting into ivermectin and should somebody run that or anything. I'm just talking about how all the dynamics, all these things. And that one's, again, it has been shown to be very effective at reducing tick populations. So um, people don't like intervening sometimes with nature, and I understand why, and I understand that mindset, and I respect it. But there's all sorts of unnatural things on the other side of it, which are detrimental to us and to the animals. That let's just face it. Wildlife management in North America is defined by how man manages it. You know, we're the overriding factor as to whether resources are managed properly or whether it's eradicated.
Yeah.
And new diseases, I think, that are unnatural. I personally have the belief that we should intervene at a reasonable level, weighing everything out, understanding where everything, the costs and minuses to all these things. But for example, if somebody said, "Hey, Lyme's disease is going crazy in your county, and your kids are going to get gobbled up by ticks and probably get Lyme's disease," if somebody said that to me, I probably would be throwing ivermectin out. Well, if even if it was illegal, I probably would do it. And we don't have that situation here, but there's certain things I got to weigh out. Yeah, I don't want my kids. I don't want ticks freaking everywhere getting my kids Lyme's disease. So man's intervention um, can be good and bad, and a lot of this you just got to weigh it out on your own. But back to your original point on my very very uh,
It's good
precise,
stuff.
concise point there. Supplemental feeding absolutely works. Mineral supplementation absolutely works at antler development, at fertility, at general nutrition for deer. Can you still get massively enhanced nutrition through, diverse food plots, through timber management, through proper browse, natural forbs? Absolutely. So if somebody said you can't supplemental feed, and you can't put out mineral, am I going to find ways to enhance the nutrition of deer? Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can make huge strides, just like I said, supplement makes a huge advancement to deer. You can do things to your habitat that make huge advancements there too. So it's not like somebody just has this one tool. I got to
Yes.
spend a lot of money on supplemental feed, which I don't really like. No, there's multiple options at how you can handle this
Like
situation.
like TSI, mineral stumps, those types of things. So
Huge.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want my deer to have, it's just like a multivitamin for a person. If you can, if you can absorb that correctly, we're deficient in a lot of the things we eat. Cattle are deficient in a lot of things they eat. That's why they get all sorts of supplementation. And if you look at like mineral stumps or natural browse and you look at the different mineral contents in there and the micros and the macros and the protein levels, it's obscene. It's awesome. It's not perfect, but it's going to have most of what they need. And in any region, you will be deficient in certain areas, and every region's different. Little things that people don't think of, like you go pull a soil sample throughout anywhere in the Midwest, it's going to be sulfur deficient. I'll almost guarantee you it'll be sulfur deficient. People don't realize that's new in the last 20 years. Why is that? It's because all the emission change, which is good. Less sulfur going to the atmosphere from burning diesel and these things. So everybody's like got these sulfur deficiencies. You're going to have a boron deficiency. Almost everybody. You probably will be low on zinc, manganese, and yeah, I won't get bore people with chemistry
So
here.
real quick, so how do you fix sulfur deficiency? Like in a very quick way. What do you add to that?
Go get sulfur. Really
Which
easy.
where do you buy? Like where do you get? Is it potash that helps with sulfur?
No, potash is potassium.
Okay.
Sulfur is a element of itself. So if you go to a co-op, because it's such a widespread deficiency across the Midwest, which is new in the last 20 years, the co-ops have all had to react to that because everybody takes their soil test and like, hey, I'm way down on sulfur. And, usually I was sitting really good. And usually I just had to add calcium because my pH was too low and I'm trying to raise it. And sulfur is going to drive down your pH. So you got to counteract that with more calcium. But you can go to the co ops now or anywhere and get sulfur, and it's just part of your fertilizer cart. Now, if you go get manure or compost, I fertilize now with just compost. So just degraded food matter, which is probably the best fertilizer known to man. And it has a natural sulfur content in there, which takes care of my needs. But yeah, you can go to anywhere and get sulfur now. And your micros, you can go to a lot of places and get most of your micros. And that one's a big one that's overlooked in food plots, or even crops, even crop production. Down in Kansas, I'm like, hey, I need to get some things. And right now I'm just doing conventional fertilizer just because we're getting going. I'm like, hey, I need manganese, I need boron, I need zinc, I need whatever. What? We don't have any of that. You don't have any of that. So I had to figure that one out. So yeah, but very important stuff,
Mhm.
very overlooked, and we're getting way down in the weeds, but very important, and even farmers are missing out on that stuff.
Mhm.